I left Christianity 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago. And I wanted to make a video kind of reflecting on that fact and on the journey since. And also, if people watch this who know me personally, I think I want to give them the chance to kind of hear my side of the story and make up their own mind about it. So when I say something like I left Christianity 5 years ago, it comes with like a big asterisk, okay? With like a big addendum of things I want to say. Because I also like to say this thing where I'm like, I'm not a Christian, you know. Yeah, I left the faith of my upbringing and the church and the denomination that I grew up in, but it doesn't mean I'm an atheist, okay? I'm not an atheist, for the record. It doesn't mean I am now like the sinner who lives like a worldly life and doesn't care about God. To be honest, I think I care about God and about investigating this line of thought a lot, probably more than most Christians I know. Anyway, let me give some context. Let me give a little bit of background. Even though I was born and raised in Germany from late 2016 through about April of 2023, so about 6.5 years, I lived in the US in Michigan. I moved there with my parents and with some of my siblings. But in mid 2020, my family that had moved there with me moved back to Germany, and I was there alone, basically. They moved back because of my dad's job, and so I moved in with a family friend who then became like my first roommate, and he really kind of became a brother to me during that time. He was a little bit older, and he was also from that church that I was a part of. The church was always like a really, really big part of my life. Arguably, it's still like the biggest part of my family's life. I essentially grew up in this non-denominational church that really prioritizes, you know, the church and your fellow kind of brothers and sisters, and faith and belief and everything is just number one priority in their lives, which makes sense if you believe your interpretation of the Bible to be true. Obviously, it's like the most important book and the most important thing in your life. So anyway, let's go to late 2020. Again, this was after my family had moved back to Germany. I was kind of doing my own thing. I was in college. I was living by myself slash with my first roommate. And this was kind of the period of time where I really started to question a lot of things related to my faith. I don't really remember that there even was like this one catalyst that made me question things all of a sudden. There was not this one big event where I was like, wow, now I don't know if anything is true anymore. It wasn't like that. Okay. I think it was kind of like a gradual thing. I do think the fact that my family moved back to Germany and that all of a sudden I had a little bit more space and time to myself and to think for myself really, really helped me, or forced me to think for myself a little bit and to make my own choices, my own decisions. Around this time also is when like the first COVID lockdowns were happening. And I think this was a weird time for everybody in general. I think it threw things off for everyone in a big way. And then if you consider me being 21 at the time, it's just a time in which I think a lot is bound to change for someone, okay? Safe to say this was a difficult period because I was kind of going through it alone, more or less. I couldn't really talk to many people about it. I did have one friend, at least, who she lived in Chicago at the time. I lived in Detroit, but she also grew up in the same denomination as me, and so we had a lot of kind of shared background. And with her, I was able to speak on a lot of these things, on my doubts, on things that didn't really make sense to me, stuff like that. This was really, really helpful because she understood where I was coming from and she didn't judge me for it. And so I think this was one outlet for me to start like safely exploring some of these things. Okay. Some of the things I started struggling with were kind of like the obvious things. Like, it's basically official teaching in the denomination that my family is a part of, that earth creationism is true. Essentially that the earth was created in 6 days, uh, roughly about probably like 6,000 years ago. Evolution is basically seen as like this, evil doctrine that ungodly scientists come up with because they don't want to believe in God. They don't want to believe that we were created in His image and so forth. Another thing, obviously, was kind of like this whole doctrine of hell. And not all Christians believe this. Again, there are Christians who are universalists who think that in the end God will save everybody. I think that's a really nice view. I don't think the way I read the Bible, it's the view that I would come to. I do think the Bible teaches that you go to heaven if you believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. Uh, I don't. There are people like David Bentley Hart who've written books on this, who I want to read. I haven't read them yet, but I'd be curious to see if he can change my mind um, on this. But I do think the way that most Christians see hell is how hell makes sense. But that was a big thing that made me obviously suspicious, that God would create this world and He would create people and in the way that He did, knowing what they would do, because obviously God is all knowing. So He kind of set out this world and He essentially set out the rules for this game, quote unquote, yeah, while knowing the outcome. And you understand where this line of thinking goes, but I was really, really struggling with that. But to give you some more background around what was happening in my life then, I was in college and I was part of this Christian organization actually called Crew, where people of different denominations come together, do some evangelizing on campus, but also just it's just a community thing. And it introduced me to a lot of people in the city of Detroit, a lot of Christians, a lot of good people, a lot of young people. I also had like my first girlfriend at that time, which was really interesting because she was also part of Crew. She wasn't like a born again believer. And it was an interesting dynamic that I kind of allowed myself to get into. Her dad actually was a really big mentor figure during that time as well, because he also wasn't a born again Christian, but he was pretty literate when it came to all things faith and religion. And he told me, because we had conversations about what I was going through, my deconstructions, all my thoughts, and he was like, don't throw everything away, that you have learned from your upbringing and your faith. And he was very wise in that way, where he would encourage my thinking and my exploration, but he would tell me to be cautious as well and to not just like throw everything out. So I had that going on. It was just a time period where I did a lot of exploring. I met a lot of people. I met a lot of Christians. I met a lot of non-Christians. And I had a lot of these conversations, these faith conversations, with a lot of different people and a lot of different viewpoints. And I just soaked in as much as I could from as many different people as I could, as well as people from my denomination. It wasn't like, oh, I was going out into the world and trying to be convinced or trying to be kind of pushed off the path that I was on. It wasn't like that at all. It was just, I knew deep down that I had these questions and that I had to explore them, because it wasn't enough to just like pray about it. Okay. And I think ironically, the diversity of Christians and of Christianity that I came into contact with during that time because of Crew, and because I also kind of sometimes started going to different churches in Detroit. Mm, this diversity ironically made me question my very own Christianity. It was like, wow, like there's all these people who believe just as fervently that they have the truth, or that they have a that their viewpoint is somehow correct. How can that be? You know, how can it be that the truth is so confusing? It just made me less certain that I was right, or that the denomination that I was a part of had the truth, quote unquote, or had a good grasp on the truth at all. It made me less certain. It made me more humble, I think, in in my beliefs. It lowered like my my grip on what I thought was true. Needless to say, this was a super challenging time again, because I knew what I was doing, okay? I knew that if this went far enough, it would change my life forever. It would change the way I would think and believe forever. But at the same time, it wasn't like I was actively doing like the deconstruction. It's more like that it was happening, and that I allowed it to happen, which I unequivocally think was a good thing. And I am so grateful that I went through this period of time, and that I'm still very much an explorer, and I'm still very much interested in these things, but I am so much more calm about where I stand, and I'm so much more okay with not knowing, and kind of with being in this eternal like unfolding, in this like ongoing process, But at the time, it was very much like this not this battle of good and evil or something, but it was very much this like my conscience was telling me, ironically, to explore these questions. Because in the church, it was very much like, okay, you can have doubts, you can have questions, that's normal, of course it's normal, you're a thinking person, but there's always like a big but. Don't let it go too far. Pray about it. There's also always this connotation of like doubts do come from the devil. Like the devil does work through doubting and questioning. Like, did he really say this? In the Garden of Eden, the snake has kind of this line of thinking where the devil incarnate as the snake is like, did God really say this? Did God really? And so it's this kind of thinking. It makes sense that it's seen by a lot of people in the church as like a bad thing. It's something you have to be really careful with. As I came to understand the psychology a little bit more behind churches, behind denominations, it became so obvious to me that, of course, doubt is a good thing in this like faith context. It became so clear to me that, like, of course you would think doubt is bad if you have to hold on to this dogma in order like to sustain your faith. But again, it became so obvious to me that, like, wow, if God has given me a brain to think about things, if God has given me the ability to reason and to discern what is right and what is wrong, doubt is like such an important instrument and such an important like tell. If something doesn't make sense to me, the the way to go about it isn't to pray the doubts away, or to kind of hide to like shield my eyes from like looking too much. It's like to investigate and to be open, and to just be open. There was a quote that I kept coming back to, and it went like, let me see if I can find it. It's by Thomas Paine, And he says, it is error only and not truth that shrinks from inquiry. So it is error only and not truth that shrinks from inquiry. And this became so clear to me, that this fear that I observed in people from my church and in general, people who hold on to a dogma because it's so important to their identity. Because if they let go of this dogma or of that dogma or of this part of their ideology, it takes something away from their identity, from who they are as a person, from how they see themselves in this world, and what gives them meaning and what gives them purpose. And so it's a scary thing to inquire and to go down that path. But I started to notice these things, and it started to give me a little bit of confidence that what I was doing was the right thing. Questioning this denomination that I was a part of also made me question the broader belief system that I was a part of, aka Christianity as a whole. It kind of felt like my faith, or my Christianity, let's say, it felt like a bubble that once it burst, like the whole thing popped, okay? And all of a sudden everything was up for question. This was scary, like, because this was a worldview that I was holding for 20 plus years. Okay, not really. I didn't start being a believer at 0 years old, but you get it, until the age of like 21, this was like the worldview that I had, with all its implications. I thought that there was a God who loved me, who had a purpose for me. I thought that Jesus Christ had died for my sins, and I truly, really believed all these things, okay? Just a side note, at one point, someone after this, when I was visiting my church in Germany, actually, and I came to kind of talk to someone about this, he said, and he accused me basically of, wow, like, you never believed. You must have never really been a true believer, because God would never let go of his sheep. And the fact that you're no longer believing means that you never really believed. And this was so offensive to me. But it revealed something, again, about the psychology of believers, and about people, about ideology, about identity. Anyway, everything was up for question, and so I would continue to investigate and to go down this route, something. I think I started to understand a lot more of the psychology behind everything, and how big of a role really psychology played in all of this. This wasn't just a fake thing. It wasn't just a read your Bible thing. It had so much to do with social incentives, social structures. Like, how come I'm in this denomination? And, well, I was kind of born into it. How come I'm still a part of it? Well, my family's a part of it. All of my most important friends are a part of it. I have years and years invested in this community. And to really just say these things explicitly, and to look at them explicitly, gave me the ability to say, okay, even if this isn't wrong, I need to go on this journey and find out. And maybe I come back and realize, okay, I was right about, or my beliefs, my faith is right about most things, and maybe Christianity is true, maybe the Bible is true, but maybe it's a different version of Christianity that ends up being true, or whatever. But whatever the outcome would be, I knew I had to go on the journey and find out for myself. Yeah, it wasn't enough anymore to be like, to just keep going, okay, because I had been on this path for years now. And I think for some people this is obvious, for other people this isn't obvious. This was such a big deal to me, partly because I think the denomination that I was a part of, and that my family still is a part of, is very hardcore, if you want to put it that way. Because I had conversations too with some people who were like, well, yeah, I went through this when I was like in middle school. I thought all of this was bullshit, and it was so obvious to me. And I was like, okay, cool. I can't relate to this. Some people just don't understand how deep you can be in something and how certain you can be that a certain worldview is true, especially if you're so deep in a given community and everybody in this community is reaffirming like the truth of like, yeah, like we're on the right path, like we believe the right thing. And these people and you hang out with them, their parents, you know them since you were kids. It's your family, it's your cousins, it's again your most important friends. You're deeply, deeply involved with these people, and you know them to be good people, and you know them to benefit from these beliefs. Okay, you know that certain beliefs that you hold make them better people, make them more honest people, make them more loving people. And so how could this be wrong? How could I have been misled? These are difficult things to kind of question when you're 21, because you're not a kid anymore. But also, who are you to question, these other adult authority figures and so forth? Anyway, I'm rambling. A big thing for me was like this truth idea, okay? Because truth obviously is a big word in every religion, in every ideology, right? The thing is that I noticed was like, look, I cannot claim to have the truth. I can't, but I can be honest with myself. I can be honest, like in this inquiry, and I can be honest and say that I don't know a lot of things. Look, I might be honest, I wasn't there when the universe started. Uh, I wasn't there when God created everything in 6 days, or also I wasn't there when the Big Bang happened. I can just kind of look at the theories, and I can look at how people talk about it, and I can see which makes more sense to me. And I can admit that I'm not a scientist, and I can admit that I'm not a biologist, and that I haven't studied evolution to the depth that I would need to be able to say, okay, this is how it worked. But I can listen to people who know about it, and I can like discern who makes more sense to me. And again, there's this distinction between truth and honesty. What is the ultimate truth? I don't know. But can I be honest with myself in this context? Yes. Okay. Those two aren't necessarily like the same thing. Eventually, I stopped. I stopped going to my church like super regularly. At this point, I had always been going regularly, like multiple times a week. And at some point, I kind of took a little bit of a step backwards. I stopped participating in like the breaking of bread, which was it's like the communion essentially. We would take there's like a loaf of bread, and I don't need to over-explain this. If you're familiar with Christianity, you kind of know what this is, okay? But I stopped participating in that because it's something that is done uh, among believers, okay? And I didn't want to participate in something that I couldn't authentically be a part of. Okay, I didn't, on the one hand, want to have this like insane identity, life, belief crisis going on. I didn't want to be participating in that, and then at the same time going to church on Sunday and just like partaking in the Holy Communion, in the breaking of bread. On the other hand, this just didn't feel right to me, and so I stopped doing that. This whole thing was so difficult again, and I think I mentioned this earlier, because the people that were closest to me, the people in the church, I couldn't really share with them what I was going through and I did share with some of them, and over the years with a lot of them, but really most of the time, this conversation falls on misunderstanding. It falls on miscommunication. It's just not very productive. Luckily, I found that there are a lot of different Christians from other denominations tended to be a lot more understanding. What seemed authentic to me, this journey that seemed authentic to me, that I needed to go on because of my conscience sake, because I had just had to kind of find, not even find ultimate answers, but I had to ask the questions, and I had to really ask them, and not just ask them and pray about them and kind of forget about them, but really get to the nitty gritty of it. But this thing that again seemed authentic to me seemed kind of offensive to a lot of people in the church. It was and is, for some reason, so hard for a lot of those people to talk to me about this, including my family, including lifelong friends. Look, this is 5 years ago now, right? This deconstruction happening, and there are whoa, shit, my chair's breaking down. Anyway, and there are a lot of people, a lot of lifelong friends from this church that I just still haven't had the conversation with. Or if I've had the conversation with them, it kind of goes something like, I'm praying for you, or I'm thinking about you. And there's not much of a conversation at all. It's more of an acknowledgement that things aren't the way they used to be. A lot of the time, it's only like, hey, I'm praying for you. And there's a lot of talking behind my back. I know this because various people have said certain things to me that make no sense at all. And they have had no prior conversation with me about any of this. And they have only heard that, like, oh, Sam has left the faith, or is like, part of the world, is going a worldly way. And everything is always said with such a, sad tone and everything. And the thing is, I understand why. Like, I'm not trying to sound ignorant. Like, I get it. Okay, because at one point I had the same beliefs, and I also thought that if somebody left the church or if they left the faith, that they were on the wrong path, and I felt bad for them and I felt sad for them, and I would pray for them. So I get it, is the thing. But they don't get me, okay, is the other thing. It was tougher, of course, in the beginning, and at this point I kind of have built my own little life apart from all of this, obviously, but still. I had a lifelong friend, basically break up with me because I no longer believed the right thing. And we just stopped talking. And he was one of my really good friends. We've had a conversation since that has like ameliorated the effects a little bit. He apologized for doing what he did. Kind of, I think he came to see that it was maybe a little bit wrong. He used like the verse from the Bible, like that you shouldn't be unequally yoked with like unbelievers and so forth. What does light have to do with darkness, etc.? Reliving all this like now in this video does remind me of like, wow, I really did lose a lot. And the thing is, I knew that I was gonna lose a lot, but still I knew I had to do it. I had to go on this journey. And I'm still on this journey, but I'm happy with where I'm at, and I'm happy I made the choices that I made, even though I hurt a lot of people, and even though there's a lot of misunderstanding. And yeah, I am personal in this video, but I think it's the type of video that requires me to be so. Like my grandma, one of my grandmas, I've had conversations with about this, and I love her, and she does not know how to filter herself. She just says what she thinks, which God bless her. But she told me, I mean, some crazy things like, like I let the devil in, and I let him blind me, and I let him. Essentially, she said that I allowed the devil to like take me away and to just completely blind my view of what is true and what is right. And I tried to explain to her kind of like, no, I think, look, I think there's good reasons for me to have, question things. And I think I kind of tried to explain my doubts to her and so forth. But it's just the lack of understanding that I have experienced from people who are supposed to be closest to me, is really something. All of this has been a lot easier the last couple years. All right, this has been a journey I've been deep 5 years into, and I think just time heals a lot. And time also allows people who misunderstand you to maybe not understand you, but maybe accept that things are different now, and maybe accept that you're not the same like little boy anymore that doesn't give them these heartaches and issues. When my family moved back to Germany in 2020, again, COVID was going on, and I ended up not seeing them for about a year and a half because of travel restrictions and so forth. And so when I went to Germany to see them for the first time in a year and a half, before I went, I wrote them like a little like letter on WhatsApp, just kind of prefacing like, hey, when I come back, we haven't seen each other in a year and a half, and honestly, I've changed, and I don't necessarily see everything the same way anymore. Mind you, before then, we were all part of the same church. Of course, we had our problems, but as far as everybody was concerned, we were on the same page about like the big questions in life, Jesus and God and the afterlife. And it's like if you get this, you get this. If you don't get this, the idea that really everything is at stake, okay? Your life, your afterlife. To a Christian, this life on this earth is a fraction of your existence, right? You continue to exist for eternity. You don't stop existing. Your soul keeps existing, and your consciousness keeps on existing. And so to like my family or any family who loses someone to the world, it's like they lose this person already on this earth because they start living their worldly life or whatever. And then or you believe that that they are going, essentially, that they might be lost, that they might, for all of eternity to come, might be in hell. Okay, and so me having this understanding from the get-go, I knew that depending on how far my investigation, how far my doubts, how far my thinking about these things would go, it would end up leading to it would inevitably end up leading to like a fracture in the relationship with my parents and my family, because again, to them there is no bigger deal than this. Yeah, there is no more important question than, do you believe that Jesus is your Lord and Savior, that he died for your sins? If you don't believe that, nothing else matters. And I said I wrote a little letter over WhatsApp to my family before visiting them in Germany, after not having seen them for a year and a half. And when I got home one evening, my dad was like, wait, can you explain to me this thing that you wrote? I didn't really get it. And then what followed was like a conversation about this topic, me trying to explain where I was coming from. And I hate to say this, and I do say this with love, but what followed wasn't much of a conversation. It was more of a lecture about how I was wrong and how what I was doing was dangerous. And don't I know that you are judged? There's a final day of judgment. There's a bunch of judgment at the end, but essentially you're judged by what you knew and what you didn't know. So for someone from the perspective of this like faith, this Christianity, for someone who has all the knowledge that I have, right? Who has grown up in the church, who knows everything there is to know, essentially, and then decides to question God, and then decides to question the Bible and everything, and decides to do a 180, essentially. For him, the punishment is going to be a lot worse because of all the knowledge and the responsibility that he has. So that was like a point my dad made. But unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of understanding, and there wasn't, because I tried to explain, like, look, here are these things that just don't make sense to me anymore. I can't reconcile them anymore. And also, in all these conversations with believers, I always try to make it a point to say, like, look, I'm not choosing not to believe anymore. It just, you don't choose what you're convinced by. This doesn't convince me anymore. It doesn't compute in my head anymore. It doesn't make sense anymore. This doesn't mean that I didn't believe at a prior point in time. I did. Right? Remember that one guy I mentioned, he literally accused me of never having been a believer in the first place, never having been authentic in my belief in the first place. And this was years ago. It still sticks to me, like this audacity to say that to someone and to really mean it, right? But obviously, I just know myself, and so in conversations with believers, I don't as much anymore, but I tried to in the beginning really make clear that, like, look, the person that you knew was really me, right? All these years I went to church with you and I prayed with you. That was really me. I really believed those things, and I really was authentic in all of that. But that same authenticity and that same person is still me, right? Yeah, it was just curious to me how little understanding some people can have for my path and my inquiry. Um, in all seriousness, I'm very grateful for, despite everything, despite how this has affected the relationships with, again, my family, a lot of my friends, a lot of the community that I grew up having. I'm deeply grateful for having started this journey, for having really listened to my conscience, for having stayed authentic to myself. This was really important to me. It always seemed obvious to me that I had to stay true to the things I didn't know and the things I did know. And I was always clear that maybe I find my way back to Christianity. Wherever I find my way, it has to be real, right? I can't just lie to people, lie to myself. And again, this really practical and important distinction between truth and honesty, I think, played a big role, because really it nowadays so many things are so obvious to me that at one point were like a really novel insight, and now I don't really think about them anymore. But claiming to have the truth when it comes to like this, like your metaphysical worldview, right? Claiming to really have certainty in its truth just now seems so absurd to me. And I'm just deeply comfortable saying, look, I don't know. I don't know what the origin of life is, of the world, of the universe. Science seems to point to a big bang, but science also seems to be pretty clear that it doesn't have an answer to what came before. But saying that we don't know isn't an admission that it doesn't make sense. It's just to say that we can't look further than that. Saying that it looks like evolution is probably very, very much true doesn't entail that, oh, there is no God. Again, I'm not an atheist, right? But this ability to entertain multiple thoughts in your head and not immediately throwing everything else out the window, I think is a sign of like a healthy intellect. And it's a sign of like a kind of frail ego, to be honest, to I don't like when Christians do this, and when they present like a complete, straw man of like evolution or something, just so they can hold on to their version of God or something. It's like, what are we doing here? Do we care about the truth, quote unquote? Do we care to be honest with each other, or do we only care to stay in our lane and kind of keep a cohesive social order or whatever? Again, it became so obvious to me, like how much of this like thinking that I had grown up with was just to keep the social to just keep the community intact, to just, I mean, because what do you do if you're part of this community, if you have years, maybe decades invested in these people, and all of a sudden you go like, oh, I don't know if this is true anymore. Most people just can't afford to do that because they don't have anyone else, because they don't even have the capacity to start over. What would they even do? Their whole social life would fall apart. And so I think their brain honestly protects them for even allowing themselves to really question things. So yeah, I think I'm rambling. I think this is probably not a very well structured video, but it was important for me to film something. And if in any way this helped anyone, again, maybe someone is watching this who knows me personally, and maybe I should have recorded this video in German, because there's a lot of people in the denomination in Germany that I grew up in who I kind of want to see this video. But if you know me personally, then please feel free to reach out to me regarding this topic. And again, I'm so grateful that I had the time and the space away from like the original, like the denomination in Germany that I grew up in. I was in a different country in the same denomination, but it was way smaller. So I was like invested in it a lot less, like socially. And then once my family moved back to Germany, I could breathe, and I could think for myself without always having the reinforcement of, again, this worldview. And yeah, so I'll leave it at that. I hope to make a lot more videos on this channel that have to do with Christianity, with God, with religion, with spirituality, with all kinds of things. Sitting with Sam. I know I haven't been producing a lot of videos. I've been taking my time making videos, but Sitting with Sam is here to stay for the long haul. So if this is something that you're interested in, please do follow along. Follow me on social media. I have Instagram, I have Twitter. I'm on TikTok as well. I'm going to be having conversations with other people. I might be making more solo videos. I'm still in the process of kind of figuring out my language and my style, my mode. But I'm here to stay, and I'm here to sit. And if you want to sit with Sam, then yeah, please do follow along. All right, signing out. Peace.